I allowed myself to be drawn to Thunder, my horse, to the feeling of power, of control, of something completely unlike anything I had ever known. I felt a strange connection to him, something raw, untamed, and intense. As I stood there in the barn, the night air heavy around us, I reached out, feeling the warmth of his coat, his breath coming in slow, steady puffs. And when I did it, when I allowed him to penetrate me, the pleasure was indescribable. It took me in a way I never thought possible. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The sensation, the pleasure, was all-consuming. I had never known such intensity, such fulfillment. It was wrong, I knew it, but in that moment, it felt right. It felt like the one thing that could heal the wounds Tom's absence had left behind. For 5 long years, my husband, Tom, had been away for his job. 5 years of phone calls, video chats, and empty promises of soon-to-be reunions. And though we spoke every night, I couldn't shake the feeling of loneliness that clung to me, like a second skin I couldn't peel off. But tonight was different. As I stepped into the dimly lit barn, I could feel the weight of the silence. It was all-consuming. Thunder, my horse, stood in the far corner, his massive body outlined against the faint light that filtered in from outside. There was something about his presence tonight. He seemed different. His deep brown eyes locked onto mine with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. My gaze traveled slowly over his muscular frame, from his broad chest to his long, powerful legs, and then I saw it, the thing I had never truly noticed before. I froze. His joystick, his thick-veined shaft, was fully erect, standing as though it had a life of its own, pulsing with energy. It seemed to call out to me in the silence of the barn. The sight was overwhelming. It was enormous, far bigger than I ever imagined, and there was something in the way it stood, so hungry, so desperate. For a moment, all I could think of was the years of loneliness I had endured, and the yearning that had only grown with time, the ache inside me that my husband's absence could never fill. I'm not sure how long I stood there, staring at him, but when I finally snapped out of the trance, I realized that I had already crossed a line. I didn't know what possessed me to approach him, to feel the rush of forbidden desire that stirred deep within me. I just couldn't resist. The loneliness I had lived with for so long, the yearning that had gnawed at my soul, it all suddenly felt like it had a chance of being satisfied. I walked closer to him, my heartbeat echoing in my ears. Before I proceed with my experience, let me formally introduce myself. My name is Diana. I'm 47 years old, and for the past 23 years I've been married to Tom, a man who was once my world. We lived in a quiet suburban town outside of Chicago, and life had always been predictable. Until the day Tom got the job offer that would take him away for 5 years. The company had offered him an overseas assignment, and we both thought it would be an exciting adventure. He would be gone for just a few years, and I would manage on my own. But what I didn't expect was the crushing loneliness that would consume me the moment he left. Tom is 52, a dedicated and hard-working man. He's always been the provider, the one who made sure we had everything we needed. But in his absence, I found myself adrift. I tried to distract myself. I took up hobbies, kept busy, and even spent time with friends, but nothing worked. I was alone in a house that felt too big, too empty. Every evening I would walk down to the barn to feed Thunder. I never thought much about him, except as a companion for my walks. Until that night. It was that night that everything changed. I noticed him, not just as a horse, but as something more. His size, his strength, the way his body seemed to call to me, like he knew what I had been missing. The moment was intoxicating, overwhelming. I knew it was wrong, I knew it was twisted, but I couldn't stop myself. I had spent 5 years missing Tom's touch, his presence, his warmth. I was starving for intimacy, for something to make me feel whole again. But Tom wasn't here, and I wasn't ready to cheat on him with another man, not after all these years. not after everything we had built together. So I gave in. I allowed myself to be drawn to Thunder, to the feeling of power, of control, of something completely unlike anything I had ever known. I felt a strange connection to him, something raw, untamed, and intense. As I stood there in the barn, the night air heavy around us, I reached out, feeling the warmth of his coat, his breath coming in slow, steady puffs. And when I did it, when I allowed him to penetrate me, the pleasure was indescribable. It took me in a way I never thought possible. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced. The sensation, the pleasure, was all-consuming. I had never known such intensity, such fulfillment. It was wrong, I knew it. But in that moment, it felt right. It felt like the one thing that could heal the wounds Tom's absence had left behind. But what was even more surprising than the pleasure was how easily I fell into it. The years of loneliness, the years of desire that had been building up, they all came rushing out in that single moment. The guilt that should have flooded my mind never fully came. It was as if, for the first time in years, I was finally alive. I can't explain it. I can't justify it in a way that would make sense to everyone. But I can tell you this, it was real. And in that moment, I felt more seen, more alive than I had in years. I knew it was wrong. But when something feels so good, it's hard to stop. I didn't want to cheat with another man. I didn't want the consequences of that. But Thunder didn't judge me. Thunder didn't expect anything from me. And in that strange, twisted way, it was exactly what I needed. The nights grew longer, and my visits to Thunder became more frequent. At first, I tried to tell myself it was just a one-time thing, a fleeting escape from the reality I was trapped in. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was addicted to it. The rush, the thrill, the release. It was all-consuming. And the more I gave in, the more I craved it. I had never been one to indulge in guilt. I wasn't a reckless woman. I wasn't the type to throw away years of commitment for a fleeting moment of pleasure. But this wasn't a fleeting moment. This was something different, something real. And every time I stood by Thunder's side, his deep brown eyes locking onto mine, I felt as though I was slipping further away from the woman I once was. My emotions were a whirlwind. Guilt? Yes, I felt it. But more than guilt, I felt alive. I was no longer the lonely woman waiting for her husband to come home. I was someone entirely new, someone who had finally reclaimed a sense of power over her own life. It wasn't the same as cheating on Tom with another man. It was different. At least that's what I kept telling myself. Thunder wasn't human. Thunder didn't have expectations. Thunder didn't need my love, my loyalty, or my promises. But as the weeks passed, something inside me began to change. I knew I was living a lie, and deep down, I wondered how much longer I could keep this secret. What if someone found out? What would Tom think when he returned? I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to destroy everything we had built, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt every time I walked toward that barn. One evening, as I walked down the familiar path toward Thunder, I realized just how far I had gone. The evening air was crisp, the stars just beginning to twinkle above, but all I could think about was the pleasure, the longing, the need that had consumed me. As I reached the barn, I noticed Thunder standing there, waiting for me, as though he knew what was coming. That night, I didn't hesitate. I didn't question myself. It was as if the decision had already been made for me. I stepped into the barn, the door creaking slightly as I closed it behind me, locking out the world. It was just me and Thunder. I could feel the excitement coursing through my veins. It wasn't just physical anymore. It was emotional, spiritual. It was everything I had been missing. As I approached him, I felt the familiar tension build in the air. His massive body loomed over me, his warm breath coming in slow puffs. I reached out, feeling the softness of his coat beneath my fingertips, and then I saw it again. The thing that had drawn me in every single time, his size, his power, The sheer magnitude of him, the way he seemed to radiate strength. But it wasn't just his size anymore. It was the way I felt when I was with him. The way my body responded to him. The way my mind let go of everything else and surrendered to the sensation. Thunder was my escape. He was my release. From the loneliness, from the guilt, from the aching desire for something more. And I didn't want to stop. I won't pretend that it was all easy. The internal battle raged on inside me. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was twisted. But the more I gave in, the more I couldn't stop. I told myself that it wasn't the same as cheating on my husband with a man. It wasn't about betrayal in the way I had always understood it. It was just a way to fill the emptiness inside me. A way to feel pleasured again. But what I couldn't deny was the pleasure. I had never known anything like it. It wasn't just physical satisfaction. It was something deeper, something that resonated in my soul. Every touch, every moment with Thunder felt like I was reclaiming a part of myself that had been lost for so long. It was thrilling, terrifying, and ultimately liberating. For hours I lost myself in the sensation, in the connection I felt with Thunder. It was unlike anything I had ever experienced with Tom, and that thought both horrified and excited me. Was this what I had been missing all these years? Was this what had been building up inside me, just waiting to explode? As the night wore on, I realized something else. Tom was coming home soon. I hadn't heard from him in a while, but I knew his return was near, and as much as I dreaded it, I knew I would have to face the reality of what I had done. The secret, the guilt, the pleasure. It would all come crashing down. But for tonight, I was free. For tonight, I was alive. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. It had been 5 long years since Tom left. And when I heard his voice on the phone that morning, I knew everything was about to change. He was coming home. I hadn't expected the feeling that swept over me when I heard the news. Part of me was thrilled, relieved even, that the man I had spent so many years with was finally returning. But another part of me, the darker part of me, was filled with dread. The days leading up to Tom's return were a blur of anxiety and excitement. I spent hours in front of the mirror, trying to remember the woman I once was. The woman Tom married. I wanted to be that woman again, but I knew that the woman I had become could never go back to what we had. The guilt gnawed at me, but the memory of what I shared with Thunder was too strong to ignore. I couldn't unfeel what I had felt. I couldn't undo the intense pleasure, the sense of being alive that Thunder had given me. When Tom finally walked through the door, I couldn't help but notice the changes in him too. He looked different, older, tired. His eyes seemed clouded, his movements slow, as though the years had taken a toll on him, just like they had on me. But he still had that same warmth, that same easy smile that had drawn me to him all those years ago. The man I had loved was still there, somewhere beneath the layers of time and distance. Yet, as he pulled me into his arms, I felt a disconnect that I couldn't explain. I wasn't the same woman anymore, and neither was he. We had changed, but we didn't know how to acknowledge it. That night, as we tried to rekindle the intimacy that had once been so effortless between us, I realized something that made my stomach drop. I wasn't satisfied. It wasn't that Tom didn't try. He did. He always did. But something had shifted within me. The connection we once had felt distant, forced. I couldn't help but compare him to Thunder. The strength, the rawness, the intensity of the pleasure I had felt. Tom's touch didn't feel the same. His body didn't ignite me like it used to. Tom noticed. He always did. His hands paused, his lips hovering over mine, waiting for me to reciprocate. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was thinking of Thunder, of the primal satisfaction I had found in his presence. I couldn't stop the thought from racing through my mind, couldn't shake the feeling that I had tasted something that was so much more intense, more real than anything Tom and I had. "Diana?" Tom's voice was soft, filled with concern. "What's wrong?" I pulled away from him, suddenly embarrassed by my own thoughts. Nothing, I lied, my voice shaky, but Tom wasn't convinced. He looked at me, searching my eyes, trying to read me in a way he used to be able to do effortlessly. "I've missed you," he said quietly, brushing a strand of hair away from my face. "I'm sorry I've been gone for so long." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel the warmth of his words, the sincerity in his eyes. But all I could think about was the secret I was hiding from him, and how no matter what, I couldn't erase the feelings I had for Thunder. The guilt gnawed at me, but the craving for that wild experience, for that untamed rush, was still so fresh in my mind. It felt like an addiction I couldn't shake. Days passed, and I couldn't ignore the growing distance between us. Tom tried. He really did. He cooked dinner, he planned outings. He even suggested we take a weekend getaway to reconnect. But every time he touched me, every time he looked at me with those soft, trusting eyes, I couldn't help but feel nothing. It wasn't that I didn't love him. I did, with all my heart. But it wasn't the same. Not after what I had experienced. The next few days were filled with quiet tension. Tom and I barely spoke about the intimacy we had shared, or rather, hadn't shared, but I could feel him growing frustrated, questioning why things were so different between us. He had always been a man who could tell when something was wrong, and I could see the concern growing in his eyes with every passing day. I tried to keep the secret hidden, but the walls were closing in around me. And then, the day came. It started like any other. I had spent the morning with Thunder, feeding him and brushing his coat, just as I always did. But today was different. Today, I was more aware of the pull between us. The connection that had started as a fleeting escape had turned into something much more. I could feel it building inside me. A need I couldn't ignore. I was hungry for it, for the release that Thunder had provided. And this time, I couldn't fight it. As I led him out of his stall, the barn door creaked shut behind us. I had no idea that Tom had been watching from the window, his curiosity piqued by my strange behavior. But by the time I realized he had been standing there, it was too late. He was already making his way toward the barn. The moment I turned around and saw him standing there, his face a mixture of shock and confusion, my heart dropped into my stomach. "What the hell is going on, Diana?" Tom's voice was a whisper, a jagged breath of disbelief and hurt. I stood there, frozen, caught between guilt and shame, but also a strange sense of relief. It was over. The secret I had kept hidden for so long had come to light, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. I had always thought that when the truth finally came out, I would feel relieved, that all the guilt I carried inside would finally be lifted, and I could just move on. But standing there in the dim light of the barn, staring at Tom's shocked expression, I felt nothing but dread. His eyes were wide, filled with disbelief as he took in the scene. The barn, which had once been a place of comfort and routine, now felt like a courtroom with my secret on trial. Thunder stood nearby, his massive frame calm and unbothered by the tension in the air, while I was anything but calm. I couldn't breathe. My chest was tight, my hands trembling at my sides. I had spent years trying to protect Tom from the truth. But now that it was out in the open, I couldn't take it back. Tom didn't say anything at first. He just stood there, staring at me like he was trying to make sense of what he was seeing. His lips trembled slightly, and I saw the anger building in his eyes, the hurt, the betrayal. I knew what he was thinking. I knew what he was feeling. And in that moment, all I could do was stand there in silence, waiting for him to say something, anything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything between us. "Diana," he said, his tone a mixture of hurt and disbelief. "I'm asking you again, what the hell is this? What have you done?" I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I didn't have the words to explain it, to justify what I had done. How could I? How could I explain to him that this wasn't something I planned, that I hadn't gone looking for it, that it just happened? "I'm sorry," was all I could manage, my voice breaking as the words left my lips. I hated how weak I sounded. I hated how small I felt in that moment. "You're sorry?" Tom's voice rose, his frustration turning to anger. He took a step closer, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You're sorry? You've been lying to me for years, Diana. I come home and this is what I find. This is what you've been doing while I've been away." I couldn't look him in the eye. I felt like a stranger in my own skin. How could I have let it come to this? How could I have let myself fall so far? "I didn't mean for it to happen," I said softly, my voice cracking under the weight of my guilt. "I never wanted this. I didn't want to betray you, Tom. But you were gone, and I was alone. I couldn't keep waiting. I couldn't bear it. For something that wasn't coming." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. I could see the hurt in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Something that scared me more than anything. Disgust. "You didn't want to betray me?" Tom's voice was filled with incredulity. "You didn't want to betray me? You've been sleeping with a horse, Diana. How could you even say that?" The anger in his voice hit me like a slap, and I took a step back, feeling the sting of his words. He wasn't wrong. What I had done was unforgivable. It was beyond anything I could explain, beyond anything I could justify. But at that moment, I felt the truth sink in. I had betrayed him in the most profound way possible, and nothing could erase it. "Please, Tom," I begged, my voice trembling. "I know what I did was wrong. I know it was twisted. But you don't understand. I was starving. I was alone, and I didn't know what else to do. I never wanted this to happen. I never wanted it to go this far, but it did. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Tom shook his head, his anger turning to something darker. Disappointment. "Sorry doesn't change anything, Diana. You've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. You've ruined everything." I wanted to reach out, to hold him, to apologize in a way that might make him understand. But I knew it was too late. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. I had pushed him too far, and now I was paying the price. "I don't know what to say," I whispered, my tears falling freely now. "I never meant to hurt you. I never thought it would go this far, but it did. And now I don't know what to do." Tom's face softened for a moment, but it was fleeting. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me, like the woman he had spent 23 years with had disappeared. He took a step back, his eyes never leaving mine. "I don't know if I can forgive you for this," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again." And just like that, I felt my world begin to crumble around me. The days that followed were a blur of silence. Tom didn't say much after the confrontation in the barn, but I could feel the tension thickening in the air between us. It was like living in a house with a ticking clock, every moment louder than the last. Every time I tried to reach out to him, to apologize, to explain myself, I was met with coldness, silence that echoed in my bones. Tom didn't leave. He stayed in the house, but he wasn't really there. His eyes were vacant, like he was lost in a place I couldn't follow. I could see the distance between us widening, the space between us growing so vast that I feared we would never bridge it again. I spent my days in the same routine I had always known. I took care of the house, I fed Thunder, and I tried to hold on to some semblance of normalcy. But the weight of what had happened pressed down on me every second. The guilt, the shame, the desire to undo everything. It gnawed at me relentlessly. At night, when Tom was asleep, I would lie awake, replaying every moment of that night in my head. I had betrayed him. I had destroyed the trust that had taken us 23 years to build. But there was more to it than that. The pleasure I had felt with Thunder, the wild abandon that had consumed me, it had changed me. It had awakened something in me that I couldn't ignore. What was even more terrifying was that I didn't regret it. Not entirely. I regretted the way it had happened, The secret I had kept, but the release, the freedom I had felt, it was something I hadn't experienced in years. In some twisted way, it was the only time I had felt alive in the absence of my husband. But now, Tom was here, and every time I looked at him, all I saw was the man who had been betrayed, the man who couldn't look at me the same way anymore. One evening, after days of barely speaking to each other, I found him sitting on the porch, his face hidden in his hands. I could feel my heart constrict in my chest. For the first time since he came home, he looked vulnerable, human. The anger had faded from his eyes, replaced by something darker, something colder. "Tom," I called softly, my voice trembling. He didn't answer at first. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, the weight of the world pressing down on him. Finally, he looked up at me, his face a mixture of pain and disbelief. "You don't have to say anything," he said, his voice low. "I know what I need to know." I stepped closer, my heart aching in my chest. "Tom, please. I'm so sorry. You have to understand I never wanted this. I never meant to hurt you." He shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Do you even understand what you've done, Diana? I've been gone for 5 years. And in that time, you've done something I can't even comprehend." His words hit me like a punch to the gut, and I stepped back, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. I know it's wrong. I know what I did was unforgivable. But I was so lonely, Tom. I was dying inside without you. I didn't know how to handle it anymore. I thought I could keep it together, but I couldn't. I lost myself. "You think that makes it okay?" he snapped, his voice rising again. "You think the loneliness gives you an excuse to betray me in the worst possible way? With him?" I couldn't answer. I knew there was nothing I could say to make it better, nothing I could do to undo the damage. The silence between us grew thicker, heavier. His eyes, once filled with love, now reflected nothing but hurt. "I don't know how to look at you anymore, Diana," Tom whispered, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to go back to what we were. You've broken something in me, something I can't fix." The words struck me like a knife, and I felt my chest tighten. I had broken him. I had broken us. And there was no way to put the pieces back together. But even as the reality of what I had done settled in, I couldn't ignore the part of me that was still craving what I had with Thunder. The pleasure, the satisfaction, the release. It had been real. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was unthinkable. But in that moment, I couldn't stop the flood of desire that surged through me. I had crossed a line with Thunder, and now there was no going back. Tom stood up suddenly, his movements sharp and angry. "I can't do this, Diana," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't be married to someone who's capable of this. We're done." The finality in his voice sent a shiver down my spine. My breath caught in my throat as I watched him walk away from me, from everything we had built together. He didn't turn back. He didn't look at me again. And in that moment, I realized that the woman I had once been was gone. I was no longer the wife he had loved. I was someone else entirely, a woman who had broken the rules in the most unforgivable way. The pain of losing him, of losing everything, hit me like a tidal wave. But it was the emptiness, the loneliness that followed, that terrified me the most. I had let myself slip into a world I didn't understand, a world where pleasure and guilt intertwined, where the line between right and wrong had blurred beyond recognition. And now, I was left to face the consequences. The days after Tom left were the darkest I had ever known. It felt like the sun had disappeared, and I was trapped in a world of perpetual night. The house that had once felt like home now felt like a prison, its walls closing in on me with every passing second. I spent my days in a daze, moving through the motions without truly living. I couldn't bring myself to care about anything anymore. I had lost him. I had lost everything. But the emptiness I felt wasn't just from losing Tom. It was from losing myself, from realizing that the woman I had become wasn't someone I recognized. The loneliness that had driven me to the edge, the desperation that had made me cross a line I knew I could never come back from, had consumed me. I had chased pleasure in the wrong places, and now I was left with nothing but the consequences of my actions. Thunder had become my secret, my escape, my crutch, in a world that had left me behind. But in the end, even he couldn't save me from the truth that I was broken, the truth that I had betrayed the only person who had ever truly loved me. I spent weeks alone in that house, reflecting on what had happened, what I had done. There were nights when I cried myself to sleep, torn between the desire to make things right and the knowledge that I couldn't. Tom was gone, and so was the life we had shared. The weight of my choices pressed down on me, suffocating me in a way I couldn't escape. But one day, as I sat in the quiet of the barn, my fingers tracing the familiar outline of Thunder's coat, something changed inside me. I realized that I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep punishing myself for what had happened. The guilt, the shame, it was all consuming, but it was also paralyzing me. I had to make a choice. I had to let go. It wasn't easy. The first step was the hardest, acknowledging that I had lost my way and that the only way forward was through change. I couldn't go back to the woman I was, nor did I want to, but I could choose to become someone new, someone who had learned from her mistakes, someone who understood the consequences of her actions. It was time to rebuild. I sold the house. I moved away from the place where I had spent so many years with Tom, the place that now felt like a tomb. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I had to leave. I needed space to find myself again, to heal, to understand who I was now. The journey wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of my past tried to drag me down, tried to pull me back into the darkness, but I refused to let it. I found a small town on the outskirts of the city, a place where I could start fresh. The people were kind, welcoming, but there was still something about it that felt like a sanctuary, a place where I could rebuild without the constant reminder of my failures. Thunder was sold as well. I couldn't keep him. As much as I had tried to justify my connection to him, I knew that part of my life had to stay behind. It was time to close that chapter. I met people. I started over. Slowly, but surely, I rebuilt my life. I learned to find joy in the little things. Working at a small cafe, making new friends, rediscovering passions I had forgotten. I began to love myself again, in a way I hadn't in years. I realized that the secret I had carried inside me, the guilt, the shame, it didn't define me. I could still be whole. And as for Tom, well, he moved on too. He met someone else, someone who could give him what I couldn't anymore. I knew he had to. He deserved to be loved, to be with someone who could be the partner he had always hoped for. And as much as it hurt, I knew that the woman I had been, the woman who betrayed him, could never be part of his future. We never spoke again. But over time, I came to peace with that. I accepted the fact that the choices I had made had consequences, and that some things, some people, were meant to be left behind. It was painful, but it was also freeing. I was free to find myself again, free to build a new life on my own terms. In the end, I had learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't fill the emptiness inside you with anything external. You can't escape yourself, no matter how hard you try. The only way to heal, to move forward, was to face the truth and accept the consequences of your actions. Only then could you start anew. I look back on those years now with a mixture of regret and understanding. I can't undo what I did, but I can use the lessons I've learned to build a better future. I can forgive myself, and I can let go of the past, because that's the only way forward.